Okay, so we're going to do a lesson here on circle graphs in the graphing unit for Math Workplace 10. So let's talk about first when to use a circle graph. So you can use a circle graph for the same types of graphs you can use bar or pictographs for. You want to use it when you're comparing categories. Especially when your categories make up a whole number or a total. So if it's easy to turn your data into percentages. You don't want to use a circle graph when you're looking at data over time, for example. That would be good for a line graph. But when you have a total number and you can calculate percentages, that's when a circle graph is really good. Okay. So let's look at an example here. We have favorite ice cream flavors from students. So we have on the right side, we've got 5 ice cream flavors: vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, mint, cookies, and cream. And so you can see here, usually there's a legend, or sometimes they'll label it right on the circle graph. You can choose, right? If there's space, you could label it like this: chocolate, strawberry. But if the words are too long, like strawberry is kind of a long word, it's kind of hard to fit it into each sector of the graph. So that's why we make a legend sometimes, but I've just labeled them on there. And one thing that's really nice in the title here, we have 240 students. So we know how many students have been surveyed. And then what the circle graph does is just shows us the percentages of that total. So each sector, that's what we call each part of the circle graph, the bigger it is, the larger percentage of the total that it's representing. So by seeing which sector is the biggest, we can see the most popular flavor. And so we see the biggest one is chocolate here at 45%. And we see the least popular is cookies and cream at only 5%, right? How many students chose vanilla? So let's look for vanilla, 25%. But it says how many students, not the percentage. So we want to figure out what 25% of the total is. So 240. So what we do to calculate that is we change it to a decimal number. That's because our calculator works in decimals. Of means multiply. So this is what I'm going to type in. Or you can just simply divide 240 by 4. That also works in this case because 25% is 1/4. Let's wait for my calculator to turn on. There we go. 0.25 times 240, 60. So 60 students, 25% of 240 chose vanilla. What other types of graphs could have been used here? So when you're comparing categories like flavors of ice cream, 2 other really good graphs to use would be a bar graph or a pictograph. Especially if you have a digital program to help you make the cone pictures of ice cream or something for the pictograph. That would be nice for this example. You don't want to use a line graph here because we don't have time data or trends over time. Okay, key concept. So before we make our circle graph, we want to put important things that we want to include. We want to include a title. We want to include labels or a legend and or a legend. For our graph. And in the title, you want to put the total number of people. Okay, like we saw in the last one. Okay, so let's practice here. So it says the following data was collected about a teen's daily screen time usage. What you want to have before you do this is maybe a protractor to calculate the angles, because that's how we're going to figure out the how big to make each sector. Okay, so grab a protractor. I don't have one that I can show on my screen, but I have a ruler that I think I can change the angles on. So I think I'm going to try that. Okay, so first thing we want to do here is look at the total, which is 5. And we want to convert each of these to a percentage. So I'm going to look at social media first. Okay, so social media was 2 hours out of a total of 5 hours. If I use my calculator, 2 out of 5, that will tell me the decimal, 0.4. And if I multiply that by 100, that's going to be 40%. So 0.4, which is 40%. So 40% of my circle should be social media. Let's just do that same thing, convert each of these into a percentage. So schoolwork, it was 1.5 hours out of 5 hours. And if I use my calculator, that will tell me the decimal. 0.3 times it by 100, 30%. Gaming, 1.25 out of 5. Again, my calculator will tell me. 0.25, which is 25%. And finally, communication. Let's just make sure I have enough space here. I'll write COM for short. 0.25 hours, which I think is 0.05, but I'm just going to make sure. Yeah, which is 5%. Okay, so let's figure out how big each of these sections should be. Now I'm going to start with the 25% one, just because that one, it's going to be easy to show a quarter of a circle. Okay, so let's do the games first. So now we're going to see how big to make each section. So I'm going to do 25% of the whole circle, so of 360 degrees. So an entire circle all the way around is 360 degrees. So I want to do only 25% of that. So I'm going to type into my calculator 0.25 of times 360 degrees to figure out what angle I should make. And it should be 90. 0.25 times 360, 90 degrees. Okay, so that's the angle I want to work with. So I'm going to get my ruler out here, and I'm going to start by finding the center of my circle. And I'm going to pick a place to start my graph. So I'm going to start at the top like this. Okay, I'm going to get my ruler out and see how it's, actually I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to start right here. Just because the ruler, that's where the ruler starts. So see how the ruler is already at 90 degrees? I'm going to move the ruler, I think I can do this, over to here, yes. And then I'm going to make a line here. Okay, so this is going to be my 25% for games. Okay, I'm going to use different colors, so I'm going to do that one in blue. All right. I'm going to get rid of the ruler now. If you want, you can pause here and see if you can calculate the other angles that we want to use. Let's do social media next. So we're going to do 40% of 360 degrees to get the social media. So 0.4 times 360, because our calculator works in decimals. So 0.4 times 360, 144 degrees. So 144 degrees, you want to find that on your protractor, and we're going to go from that previous section. So I want to go 90, a whole 144 is 90 plus 54. So if I do, it's a little bit tricky because 144 minus 90 is kind of what I want to find here. 54. Yeah. So if I do 54, that's going to work because that's, so I've done 90 and then another 54. The way that my ruler works here is like, so in total there, that sector that I've drawn is 90 plus 54, which is 144. So that's showing 40% of the circle. And you can see that makes sense because that's a little under half, right? And that would be social media. So you want to use a protractor to measure those angles. I just don't have one that is easy to bring up on my screen. So I'm going to use orange for that. shade it in. Okay, next is schoolwork. So this would be 30%, so 0.3 times 360. And I get 108. So when I do that angle, it's going to be 108 would be 90 plus 18. So I would want to use 19 here. I think I want to do 90 minus 19. No, that's right. Yeah, 90 minus 19. Or 18, sorry. 72. There we go. Okay, so let's move that on here. Yes, that works. So it's a little tricky with this ruler because of the angle that it measures on. But basically what I did there is I did a little bit bigger. So I went a 90 plus 18, but because of the way that that measures, it works out to be 72 here. But it's 108 degrees from the games section, so that's schoolwork. And I always leave the most difficult one, or usually the smallest one, for last because it's just whatever's remaining. So this is 30%. So I'm going to color this one in green. Okay, schoolwork is 30%. That's done. And then the last one is going to be my communication, and that is my 5%. Okay, and we can see that's the smallest. That makes sense. So 5%, I'll just write COM for short. That's why we have the legend though, so that we can see everything better. So we have games at 25%, social media at 40, we have schoolwork at 30, and we have communication at 5. So I'm just going to color those colors in. Schoolwork was green, social media was orange, and games was. So just to recap the steps here, we want to calculate a percentage of the total for each one. I just did that by dividing and then multiplying by 100. And then you want to figure out what angle each percentage represents of the circle. So you take the percentage as a decimal and multiply by 360, because 360 is all the way around a circle. So once you get those angles, then you want to start with the easiest one. I always find like quarters or half a circle is easiest to start with. So that's why I started with games at 90 degrees, because it's exactly a quarter of a circle. And then you kind of build from there. And I would definitely recommend using a protractor to measure your angles. Yeah, and then there's one thing we're forgetting, which is a title. So we want to do screen usage. And we want to put the total, 5 hours total. Okay. Actually, I should say even more specific, daily screen usage, 5 hours total. Okay, so that's my completed circle graph.